Hello everyone and welcome to BrickCats. My channel is for anyone who enjoys custom LEGO creations, likes saving money, and or those looking to get into custom building. Today I am taking a close look at this amazing ATTE by Bousker, designer of the Republic gunship I reviewed a while back, and that is still one of my favorite models. If you're a fan of my channel or are interested in supporting what I do, please consider subscribing, liking this video, or leaving a comment. Each subscription, like, and comment helps others find my channel, and I greatly appreciate it. And if you're not a fan, let me know what you'd like to see or hear for you to become one. The ATTE was featured heavily in the Clone Wars TV series, and was a mainstay at the Republic Army. While sporting heavy weapons and strong armor, my favorite aspect of the ATTE has to be the squelching sound when it walks. Without any substitutions in mid-August 2023, I was getting 5 stores and $300 without shipping and tax for this model, which comes out to about $356 with shipping and tax. In my reviews, I offer my opinions on aesthetics and model features, parts issues you might want to look out for, the build experience, the model's integrity, and I close out with my overall impression and pricing information in the conclusion. If you're watching this review, I assume you bought the instructions or are interested in buying them. I also assume a basic level of familiarity with Bricklink's ordering system and LEGO nomenclature. I only use genuine LEGO bricks and I always purchase the instructions. I create these reviews for my own personal enjoyment and in the hopes that my advice will make your experience more enjoyable and or less expensive. Bousker's ATTE is a hair under 18 inches from the tip of the cannon up front here to the rear. It's about 11.5 inches wide from the middle foot to the middle foot, and it's about 7.75 inches tall from the surface of the table to the top of the cannon here. Those of you that follow me on Instagram may have seen the pictures I posted of the original build of this model that I finished all the way back in January of 2023. In putting that review together, I discovered that there was a new version available that addressed a lot of the issues I had with the model, so I decided to start over and build the latest and greatest out of fairness to the designer. This is the Episode 2 variant, which is mostly gray on the exterior. There are notes and a parts list included for a Clone Wars variant with dark red highlights as well. The front of the ATTE has the pilot's cockpit with some nice detailing in front of the main window and excellent shaping of the module itself. This is a really cool sub-build. It consists of 2 parts, this front section here and the rooftop. And this top part drops into the space created by these larger panels on either side here. One of my issues with the original was that there was a big gap right about here, and I was really happy to see that was filled in with trans black pieces. The standard ball turrets scale very nicely with this model, and all 4 of them are stable enough to be posed or moved around pretty much however you need to. I'm going to move to the legs now and cover all 3 of them at once, mostly so I can point out their differences. The front and the rear leg have the same basic construction as far as the lower part here, which seems fairly accurate to what we see in the movies and the shows, but I'm very impressed how the designer has correctly differentiated their connection point to the main body. The front leg is almost scrunched up underneath the armor, while the rear leg extends fairly far behind the body of the walker. The ATTE has always reminded me of a beetle, and it's probably some kind of inspiration for its shape, and the orientation of the front and rear legs reinforces that for me. So you can't really see it from this angle, but the connection point for the front leg is actually up here somewhere. There's a Technic piece that comes down like this, while the rear leg uses the hinge piece that's pretty common on the AT-AT official models. Both the front and the rear legs have a limited range of motion. The front leg joint is a bolt connection, so it's slightly more posable in all 3 dimensions, while the rear leg is limited to 2 dimensions due to the Technic hinge connection. The middle leg is appropriately beefy, with a bunch of really simple but great looking touches. In particular, I really like the inner dark bluish gray section here, and the 3x3 macaroni tiles along the outside, outlining the main joint and giving it a little bit of depth. The middle legs hold all the weight of the model, so posability is somewhat limited with these. The gear mechanism that the designer has used, you can see the gear way back here, is very smooth and secure. It's actually pretty great. So it's sturdy enough to hold the weight, but loose enough to move it around easily. So I'll lift this up, and you can turn this pretty much any way you want, and it will stay. Oh, got here. And the motion does feel very smooth as well. And I will show you a picture of the gear mechanism a little bit later, because it's hard to see from this angle. The middle section in between the two main compartments looks great. It kind of reminds me of the flexible section between two sections of a city bus. And in Canon, we get a couple of shots where you can see this section flex when the walker navigates various obstacles. The hull detailing on both halves is excellent, with a nice balance between studs and studless. If you look closely, you'll be able to see all kinds of side building and snot to get the various sections to line up just right. These little areas on either side here and here were particularly impressive to me, and I especially like how they're flush at the bottom with the rest of the armor plate, and then they're slightly indented towards the top, and this is constructed in a way that the angling comes pretty naturally, and these are accurate to the film models. Towards the rear, the designer includes this highly impressive subassembly to fit very nicely in the gaps around the rear turrets. I do feel that you might be able to get a little more of the gaps covered up, but it's really good looking just the same, and it captures the ridged shape nearly perfectly in my opinion. There is a top hatch on the rear section which is a bit difficult to open up, but both the front and the rear sections have interiors as well. The rear compartment has some seats and controls, as well as the loading ramp for the ATRTs that we see in the ride-off cycle of the Clone Wars. It's really cool how this deploys and folds up so nicely. I do think that these modified tiles here should be turned around if they're intended to be seats to make the figures a little bit easier to put on. And taking another look at the top assembly again, you can see just how crazy this is. It's really impressive, and it just kind of rests in place here. The top of the front section, of course, has the mass driver cannon, and this is another example of excellent shaping by the designer. The cannon does have a range of motion. When it's in the forward position, it actually can't tilt back, but it can rotate 360 degrees and kind of tilt up and down. And then to access the front compartment, you lift this off. And the interior of the front section is a little less exciting than the back, but has some spots to put minifigures. Again, I think those studs could be turned around to make it a little easier to pose things, but nothing too serious. In order to avoid disaster, I'm not going to turn this over here live, but instead I'll put a picture or two of the underside. While a lot of the peripheral structure is visible, the designer made a conscious effort to smooth out the main part of the underside, and included a lot of little details like these little minifigure hand structures that show up best on Rex's ATTE in Rebels, and these underside cannons that I haven't been able to find a reference photo for, but odds are it does exist, or else I doubt Bousker would have put them there. The designer describes this model as approximate minifigure scale, and I think that's reasonably accurate. It might be a little bit on the small side, but with the vagaries of minifigure dimensions and the limitations of the LEGO system, it's certainly close enough for me. Bousker's ATTE is an incredible model with no detail left out. It has a very high degree of posability with the cannons and the legs, while inclusion of an interior with the ATRT ramp along with easy access is a nice inclusion if you were putting this in a mock scene. Bousker's ATTE requires 345 elements and 2,476 pieces. There is an additional XML file included with the pieces you need to make the Clone Wars variant. Some of the most expensive elements, if not the most expensive elements, are going to be the Technic Turntable 56 tooth top, part 48168 in black, and the corresponding base in dark bluish gray, part 48452. This does have a combined part number, part 48452CX1, which is definitely worth testing to see if you get better results from the combined part number instead of each one individually. Anecdotally, I find these extremely difficult to separate once they're connected, so I have a feeling many sellers list them as the combined part because of this. This would also work in light bluish gray, which may also be advantageous for your total cost, so I would try both, and these are the large gears that make up the middle leg section. Similarly, the two halves of the hinge plate assemblies are listed separately, parts 2429 and 2430 in dark bluish gray. I recommend changing this to the more common combined part number 2429C01. This is used to shape the front roof section and part of the cannon. Light bluish gray or black would also work fine. All 6 brick modified 1x1 with studs on 4 sides, part 4733 in black, are completely hidden inside the feet underneath here, and can be any color. The following Technic axles are hidden and can be any color. The 2 Technic Gear worm screw long, part 4716, specified in light bluish gray, is completely hidden and can be any color. Black is the most common, and that also makes up part of the middle leg gear system. If you're interested in the color scheme that I have here, the original tips of the cannons were specified in black, but I think flat silver is actually more accurate. You'll want to change one of the 5 Technic pin 3L with friction ridges and stop bush specified in black to flat silver or light bluish gray. And similarly for the minifigure utensil candles in black, part 37762, you're going to want to change those to flat silver, or there is a new color as of, I think, July 2023, that's dark bluish gray. The Technic axle and pin connector toggle smooth, part 44, specified in light bluish gray, is quite expensive in this color. These are almost completely hidden in the front area, right about here, underneath the plates there. And any neutral color will work fine. Black is the most common alternative. The 5 plate modified 3x3 cross in black, part 15397, are hidden. 4 are in the feet of the front and the rear legs, right here. And the 5th is right underneath the cockpit about here. The 5 printed slopes, part 85964 PB127, can be swapped with any Star Wars-y type of printed slope, or omitted entirely if you don't care about the interior. The 2 minifigure utensil space guns in dark bluish gray, part 3959, serve as a connection point for the side panels in the front, right about here. These are most common in black, but any color will work fine. The Technic pin 3L with friction ridges, part 6558, are specified in black. The only places you can really see these are if the top sections are off or from underneath. I think blue works just as well, as they aren't visible under normal circumstances. You're going to want to make sure that the panel 1x2x2 hollow studs, part 4864B in light bluish gray, is the variation without the side supports. This is part of the front section right here, and if you get the version with the side supports, the cockpit will not fit correctly. Similarly, you're going to want at least 8 of the 33 Technic pin 1/2, part 4274 in light bluish gray for the middle legs. If you use blue ones on this section right below the main joint here, you will see them, and I think it's a little bit distracting, so don't substitute all of them for blue. Finally, consider buying at least the following 26 elements from LEGO's Pick-a-Brick service. These will likely be less expensive directly from LEGO than on Bricklink, and you'll probably reduce your store count. Pick-a-Brick orders over $35 total qualify for free shipping, and if you spend more than $14 in both the bestseller and standard categories, all of the handling fees will be waived. And as of mid-August 2023, all of these parts were available from Pick-a-Brick, and you do meet the minimum $14 threshold, as well as the $35 threshold for free shipping. Bousker's ATTE contains 759 steps, with each part or subassembly connected in each step outlined in red against a white background. There is a reasonable number of pieces added in each step, and the build goes at a fairly steady pace. Overall, I think it took me about 10 hours total, with some pre-sorting into major categories of elements. I found a number of issues with the instructions that, if changed, I think could go a long way towards improving the build experience for the better. There are a large number of steps that contain what I call floating pieces. These are pieces that don't have a connection point in a given step, but show up in the instructions in the place they're supposed to end up in. Rather than show you every one, I'm going to list them and show you a couple examples with the floating pieces circled. In the list below, if there are brackets, that just means they are mirrored subassemblies. Now, don't get me wrong, occasionally this is unavoidable. For example, the first step, there are always going to be floating pieces, but in most of these situations, it would be more logical to build up the subassembly such that you're always making a connection, which in turn occasionally requires adjusting the viewing angle. Floating pieces are generally manageable issues, as you can usually figure out what's going on. It tends to merely slow you down while you figure out how to keep the pieces in approximately the right place and make the next connection. I also found a couple of viewing angle problems. Some of them aren't too bad because you can kind of infer where the hidden piece goes, such as in step 104. You can't see the third cheese slope, but you assume it's mirrored. In steps 491 and 492, the graphic appears to not be centered correctly, which is a little awkward and creates a bad viewing angle, and the subassembly for the middle section starting in step 517, you can't see the orientation of the studs. This section has some odd sequencing in general, as it would make more sense to build backwards starting in step 524. More problematic are instances where you can't see a connection. In this model, the connection points were mostly obvious to me, but this was an issue I had with the original version, and it definitely makes this less accessible for less experienced builders. For example, in steps 207 and 219, you can't see that the existing Technic pin from the modified brick you connect all the way back in step 38 is inserted into the modified plate with hole that went on in step 204. Another example is steps 391 and 392, as well as 435 and 436, which is the other side of the walker. The connection points are fully covered by the subassembly being connected in those steps, as shown in the instructions. In steps 368 and 411, you can't see one of the dark bluish gray 1x1 round plates, so splitting these into 2 steps would have been helpful. And then just to close out this section, there were a few steps with other issues I wanted to mention. In steps 321 and 333, the orientation of the connection with the 2L lift arm does matter, and a better viewing angle or an actual photo would have been really helpful here. The lift arm should be in the horizontal orientation to get the correct alignment of the front slope sections right here and on the opposite side of the cockpit. In step 476, along with its mirror, it would have been helpful to point out which is the 4L bar and which is the 3L bar. It's not obvious from the picture, and the 3L bar actually looks a little bit longer to me. Step 450 is the first step of the middle legs, but is missing a ×2 indicator, which doesn't appear until step 494 at the end of the subassembly. I said in the aesthetics section that this was the episode 2 variant, and the designer has included notes in the instructions to modify the color scheme to be more accurate to the Clone Wars. In my opinion, it definitely would have been better to have separate steps illustrating exactly where the dark red pieces would go instead of notes. LEGO instructions are visual by nature, and reading text for a substitution definitely falls short of my expectations in this case. Finally, the first few steps of the gear mechanism for the middle legs in steps 460 and 463, it is pretty difficult to get these subassemblies to stay in place until you lock them in with the axles. There's not really any way around this, and this isn't a sequencing issue or anything like that, but I just wanted to flag it as it took me some patience to get everything to stay in the right place. Overall, I did not find this model to be overly complex or rely on exotic unstable connections. The way some of the sections fit together is extremely impressive, and the build is generally pretty fun. While they're not complex, some subassemblies are fragile and take some patience to construct. So I do think this would be a suitable build for someone who has a custom build or two under their belt already, and I would say this is definitely more on the challenging end of the spectrum. This is a surprisingly sturdy model. The main core of the walker is all Technic, and I have to commend the designer on the structure of the walker overall, because it's not only clever, it's also very strong. Since all the weight is on the middle 2 legs, there can be a little play in the front and the rear legs, but other than these curved slopes that sometimes pop off, there's nothing that's likely to fall apart too easily. The legs themselves, even if they look a little flimsy and they do kind of dangle in certain places, especially this rear one, they're fairly strong and they're not easily broken. Since the top sections rest in place and don't have a traditional connection, they're obviously a little less sturdy than the sides of the walker, which are locked in place. The mass driver cannon is also a little delicate, and lifting up the front section of the roof by the cannon assembly can result in the cannon separating like that, but this is pretty easy to put back. But aside from those areas, it does take some intentional force to break off the main parts of the model. This will stand up to light play and would absolutely be fine in a mock or on display. The wide stance makes it pretty sturdy, and the width of the feet on the middle legs paired with the resistance of the gear mechanism means it's not going to collapse or fall forward or backward if your table gets bumped. I absolutely love this model. The instructions have some issues, but they are not insurmountable, and I think most experienced builders will be able to power through it without too much issue. Inclusion of the smallest details is really impressive, for example those little indented sections on the sides, and the shape of the cannon, and all in the model I'm not too worried about falling apart spontaneously. This is an excellent model, and anyone looking for an ATTE should put this one at or near the top of their list. Again, without any substitutions, I was getting 5 stores and $300 without shipping and tax, or about $356 with shipping and tax. With the substitutions I recommended, but without using Pick-a-Brick, this raised my store count but lowered the price, and I was getting 7 stores and $247 without shipping and tax, or about $313 with shipping and tax. Buying the 26 elements I recommended getting from LEGO via Pick-a-Brick, my Pick-a-Brick total was $43, and that was enough to waive the shipping and handling fees, but does include tax. And my Bricklink total was 4 stores and $208 without shipping and tax, about $251 with shipping and tax. The total was therefore $294. And finally, buying as much as I could from Pick-a-Brick, I split this into 3 separate orders to avoid the Pick-a-Brick lot limits. My Pick-a-Brick total was $250. Again, that was free shipping and handling, but does include tax. And the remaining elements I got from Bricklink from 4 stores and $19 without shipping and tax, so a little bit high store count, unfortunately, and that was $46 with shipping and tax. And the total was therefore $296. Instructions for this model are a bit on the pricey side. They cost $24.99. They're available on Rebrickable, and there will be a link to where you can buy those in the description below. Thanks as always for joining me in today's look at Bousker's ATTE. If you built this model, you have something to share that I left out, or have a question about something I didn't cover, please leave your thoughts below in the comments. Remember to subscribe, leave the video a like or a comment, and follow me on Instagram if you haven't already. Each subscription, comment, and like helps increase the channel's visibility, and again, I greatly appreciate your support. I hope to see you back next time.